Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, the top 10 unbelievable facts about fast fashion. We seem to be constantly being bombarded by all sorts of information about climate change and what negative effects it's having on the environment and humanity as a whole. But in light of those many gloomy facts, we're not really given any options about what we can do ourselves to counter the whole situation, and this makes us feel a little more anxious and less in control with every passing day. We somehow see this whole climate change thing as a governmental responsibility of sorts. But as things often are, the environment is usually pushed to the sidelines of policymaking, as if somehow that problem's just going to go and solve itself. There are, nevertheless, things that we can do individually to curb global warming. This isn't called the age of efficiency for nothing, and we can do our part simply by becoming more efficient in everything that we do. Well, almost nothing is as wasteful as the clothes we wear. Known as fast fashion, this apparel industry has crept itself under the radar to becoming one of the leading causes of pollution in the world. Number 10. Well, what is fast fashion? Sometimes described as low-cost clothing collections that mimic current fashion trends, fast fashion is a modern term used by fashion retailers to reference a particular segment of the fashion industry that focuses on getting new garment designs from the catwalk and into the hands of consumers as fast as possible. Its emphasis is on optimizing the supply chain so as to lower the cost as much as possible and to offer an aggressive marketing campaign that will generate new trends as quickly as it gets rid of old ones. Fast fashion clothes are usually made out of low-quality materials so as to reduce costs and are usually bought by young consumers who want to keep up with the latest trends. Fast fashion, or cheap chic, got its start in the 1990s when fashion designers were under pressure to increase their revenue as department store chains were beginning to create their own lines of cheap but fashion-orientated clothing. A figurative war began to produce as many trends of clothing as possible, fueled in large part by the emergent manufacturing powerhouses from Asia. A Cambridge University study showed that in 2006, people were buying a third more clothes than they were in just 2002. Moreover, people had 4 times as many clothes as they had in the 1980s. Today, retailers like Zara, H&M, Primark, Peacocks, New Yorker, CNA, Forever 21, Topshop, and many others are synonymous with fast fashion. Number 9. Fast fashion's worth. Fast fashion is big business, as you can probably imagine. But just how big is it? Well, according to the latest statistics, the global fashion market is worth somewhere around $3 trillion, which represents roughly 3% of the entire world's GDP and $500 billion more than the GDP of the United Kingdom. The women's wear industry accounts for $621 billion, menswear is worth $402 billion, while the rest is comprised of children's wear, sportswear, bridal wear, and all sorts of other luxury goods. Fast fashion accounts for $1.2 trillion here, with $250 billion alone coming from the United States. Among the high earners here are people like Doris Fisher with $2.7 billion. She and her husband, they co-founded Gap. Philip and Christina Green, the owners of fast fashion brands such as Topshop and Topman, Dorothy Perkins, and Miss Selfridge, are worth $5.3 billion. Stephen Person, the owner of H&M, is worth $19.7 billion, while Amasio Ortega, the owner of Zara, Berkshire, Oysho, Zara, Heimann, Pull & Bear, has a net worth of $82.5 billion. In 2007, he was the richest man in Europe and the richest retailer in the world. For a short time, he actually even surpassed Bill Gates as the official richest man in the world. Inditex, the parent company of all of his shops, has over 7,200 stores worldwide. Number 8. Planned obsolescence. Even though fast fashion isn't the only one to make use of planned obsolescence, it is nevertheless an industry that's entirely defined and dependent on it. A planned obsolescence, as its name suggests, is an economic strategy in which a product is purposefully made so as to last for a short period of time. This is to incentivize continued consumption. Today, a low-cost shirt is designed to last for around 30 washes, and a pair of cheap trainers last for about 60 miles. Up until fairly recently in our history, before synthetic fabrics like polyester and nylon became so popular, clothes were made exclusively out of natural materials like wool, cotton, silk, and linen. These natural fibers are more durable than synthetic ones and thus last for much longer. But besides the fabric itself, clothes from 50 years ago were better made and were made in a much higher quality than they are today. Daniel Milford Cottam, a fashion cataloguer at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, said in an interview that there are also some deliberate measures being taken so clothes will not last as long. Some of these tricks go from using inappropriate fabrics to delicate materials that are roughly stitched together. These things accelerate wear and tear, especially during washing. Most clothes manufacturers are also aware that most people don't check the washing labels too carefully, or they use too much detergent, which can also speed up clothes degradation. Moreover, many clothes are a blend of two or more materials, such as cotton and polyester, which shrink differently in the wash, destroying the shape of the clothing in the process. Buttons are also not properly sewn on, and they're almost guaranteed to fall off. Manufacturers know that many people are too lazy to sew them back on, preferring instead to buy a new garment. But I mean, hey, what can you really expect from a $5 shirt? Number 7. Fast marketing. But in order to make all this planned obsolescence go seemingly unnoticed by the average consumer, fast fashion retailers make use of an aggressive and continuously ongoing marketing campaign that keeps shoppers always off balance. The sheer amount of new designs and collections that go on and off the shelves is absolutely staggering. Not that long ago, most fashion labels produced 2 collections per year, a spring-summer one and an autumn-winter one. But ever since fast fashion came into play, that number has skyrocketed. Today, most fashion houses are offering 18 or even more new collections every single year. This means a piece of clothing becomes fashionably outdated in about a month or even less. As a result, statistics show that we wear these low-cost clothes only 5 times on average and keep them in our closets for just 35 days before we throw them away or just let them start to collect dust. There are currently 2 main strategies in fast fashion. One is by investing heavily in their new collections with billboards, TV commercials, on-sale seasons, and marketing TV shows, among other such advertisements. Primark, on the other hand, operates with a no advertisements whatsoever policy. It instead relies on strategies like store layout, shop fittings, and visual merchandising to add for an overall pleasurable shopping experience and impulse buying. Number 6. Overconsumption. Back in the 1960s, the average American was investing in roughly 25 pieces of clothing every year. Today, it's over 80. Around 150 billion new clothes are being manufactured every single year. That's about 20 for every man, woman, and child on the planet. In 2010, an average family from the US spent roughly $1,700 on apparel every year, while the average Manhattanite spent around $362 per month. In the United Kingdom, it's estimated that roughly $46.7 billion worth of clothes exist in people's closets, often having never been worn. But once these clothes become outdated, or we no longer have any more room in our wardrobes, then 9 times out of 10, they simply end up in the dump. There is a surprising number of clothes being thrown away. An average British person throws away about 66 pounds of clothing, about 235 million items in total for the whole country, or about 1.2 million metric tons every single year. There is an estimated 13 trillion tons of clothes at landfills in the United States. Now, to be fair, some fashion companies do have recycling programs that try to curb the so-called throwaway culture, but critics say that this is basically just a token gesture so people shop without feeling guilty. Number 5. Cheap labor. As recently as 1990, half of the clothes that you'd regularly find in stores around the US were made in America. But since fast fashion, that percentage has dropped to only 2%. And as you can imagine, so have the number of jobs that revolve around this industry. In 1990, there were roughly 900,000 people working in the apparel manufacturing business in the United States. In 2011, that number dropped to 150,000. Roughly 42% of these imports, they come from China, with the rest being shipped in from other countries such as Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, or Mexico, among many others. You probably already know where we're going with this one, and that's exactly where the manufacturing sector went. And that would of course be sweatshops in developing countries. There are currently 75 million people in the world working long hours to produce the many cheap clothes that we buy, and 80% of these people are women. In fact, the garment industry actually boasts that it's the top employer of women in the world, which is kinda absolutely true, Unfortunately, what they oftentimes forget to mention is that 98% of their employees are paid less than a living wage for up to 14 or even 18 hours per day of work. In Bangladesh, for instance, the median salary is around $340 per month. The average clothes maker, however, is paid just $68 per month. This means that these underpaid workers are caught in a poverty trap from which it is incredibly hard to escape. And also, we can't really forget about child labor. There are currently over 168 million children involved in child labor across the globe. That's 11% of the global population of children. And many of them are in the apparel industry. Well-known high street brands such as Nike, H&M, Gap, and Adidas, among others, have all employed the services of offshore manufacturers that were later exposed for using children in unsafe conditions. Number 4. The 2013 Rana Plaza collapse. The fashion industry's supply chain network is so convoluted and complex that Helena Halmerson, H&M's head of sustainability, says that it's impossible to be in full control of it. And because of this complexity, these world-renowned brands always have deniability in case something terrible happens or is discovered. As we've mentioned before, the driving force behind fast fashion is keeping the entire supply chain as absolutely cheap as possible. When relying on quantity instead of quality, some corners need to be cut, and this oftentimes means safety measures. With increasingly high demand, manufacturers feel pressured to deliver on that order, most often making the factory employees work extra hours, as well as employing a subcontractor of their own, a sort of shadow factory, if you will. In principle, only approved factories can make the clothes for any particular brand, but as time has shown, this is rarely the case. This is how North Korea's second largest export after coal is actually textiles. China is subcontracting manufacturers in North Korea to make clothes on their behalf, which they then ship to the United States and out to the rest of the world. And if child labor is discovered or something bad happens with any of these shadow factories, high street brands can cite deniability by saying that they had no idea that their clothes were being made there. Most of these brands have been caught multiple times with all sorts of safety irregularities or child labor, but it's always been said that they had no idea that their clothes were being made with such conditions. But given the fact that this has been happening for more than 2 decades and there are no visible improvements, some begin to wonder whether these brands don't actually prefer things staying that way. Anyway, the Rana Plaza collapse that occurred in Bangladesh is the largest clothing-related accident in the world. Some 1,134 people died and another 2,500 were injured after the building collapsed in 2013. Most of the victims were employed in the manufacturing of clothing, and many safety measures were cut and bypassed in order to increase profits and fulfill the orders. A week after the accident, a meeting between retailers and several NGOs was held in order to reach an agreement where the retailers would pay more for the clothing that they bought from the manufacturers so that they could improve their safety standards. Of the 29 brands that were sourcing their products at Rana, only 9 actually showed up for the meetings. Walmart, Carrefour, Mango, Auchan, and Kik did not want to sign up to the agreement. Most of these multi-billion-dollar companies found it extremely hard to put together just $30 million for the families of the victims. They really actually ended up only doing this after the leaders of the G7 summit coerced them into doing it. Number 3. The resource and energy-intensive fabrics. In 2015, the world produced roughly 155,000 square miles of fabric, which is about the size of California, by the way. Cotton is among the most common of these fabrics found in our clothes today. It makes up roughly 40% of all the fabrics used in the apparel industry. But cotton is an especially needy plant. For instance, even organic cotton, which might seem like a better choice, still needs roughly 5,000 gallons of water in order to produce a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. In Uzbekistan, which is the 6th largest producer of cotton in the world, so much water was diverted away from its natural flow in order to irrigate the cotton that the Aral Sea, which was actually the 4th largest lake in the world, disappeared almost entirely. This was one of the largest man-made disasters in history, and even though cotton takes up just 2.4% of all the croplands available on Earth, it consumes 10% of all the fertilizers, as well as 25% of all insecticides used in agriculture. Now, polyester and nylon are the other two major materials used to make cheap clothes. Both are derived from petrochemicals and both are non-biodegradable. In the manufacture of nylon, large quantities of nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than CO2, are emitted. When it comes to polyester, it is estimated that around 70 million barrels of oil are used every single year. Fortunately, however, clothing manufacturers are actually looking to recycle this material, mainly from used drinking bottles. But while the US only recycles 6% of these bottles, some clothing manufacturers, eager to get that recycled badge, have begun to buy unused bottles straight from the producer and use it in their clothes. Furthermore, with every single wash, every polyester-based article of clothing sheds around 1,900 individual microfibers of plastic that eventually find their way into the ocean. These are then eaten up by fish and eventually find their way into our own bodies. Scientists have also discovered that 83% of all tap water across the globe is contaminated with these microfibers. The US has the highest concentration, by the way, at 94%. Luckily, two inventors have designed a bag capable of catching these fibers while still in the washing machine. Lastly, and equally as important and devastating, is rayon. This is a material made out of wood pulp which is responsible for over 70 million trees being cut down every year to produce it. Viscose, modal, and lyocell are all specific types of rayon. Number 2. Your cheap clothes travel more than you do. Even though most of the large apparel conglomerates are based in the United States or Europe, more than 60% of all the clothes made worldwide are manufactured in developing countries. And what's more, the largest consumers are found halfway across the world in the already developed part of the planet. This means that those clothes need to be shipped from one place to the other. The same thing applies for cotton and all the other materials that may not be produced in the same place that the clothes are. This means over 90% of clothes in the world traverse at least one ocean to get into the hands of their owners. Cotton will most likely travel by truck, train, cargo ship, and even plane before it becomes a shirt or a pair of jeans. In total, cotton travels more than the circumference of the Earth. This means that fast fashion is accounting for 10% of the planet's greenhouse output. Further, when considered with all of the other negative impacts that it has, like water usage and pollution, land degradation and dye toxicity, fast fashion manages to creep its way to second place as the dirtiest and most pollutant industry after oil. But hey, it's only $5 a shirt, so like we said, what do you expect? Number 1. Slow fashion. Like food and food waste, fast fashion and the garment industry has given little to no attention to the Paris Climate Agreement. This means that even under the most optimistic predictions, almost nothing will be done about the issue. But from a brighter perspective, this means that more can be achieved than the agreement set out to do in the first place. And what's more, this issue, it's in our hands, and it's not in the hands of the government. All that we've talked about up to this point is only half of the equation. The other half, of course, is us, the consumers. And here is where slow fashion comes into play. And as its name suggests, this movement is focused on the quality of the clothing rather than the selling or buying of it by the truckload. There are many ways to engage in this sort of slow fashion trend. You could buy your clothes from a thrift store, for instance, and then bring that piece of clothing to a tailor to modify it according to your size or design. If you don't have time on your hands to scour for hidden treasures, then there's the option of looking for brands and companies that produce and sell ethically made, eco-friendly garments. There are even some mobile apps like Good Guide that help you find out more about a particular product, about how it's made and what impact it has on your health and the environment. You could instead choose to buy your clothes from a local small business, or you could even make it yourself. The point is that there are a multitude of ways to fight against fast fashion and the negative effects that it's having on our world. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new videos every day of the week. Also, I've got a podcast. It's called BrainFood, and it's got educational, entertaining content just like this. It's a bit longer form and goes into a lot of depth on a specific subject, getting into all of the fascinating little details. You can check it out through the link in the description below, or just search your favorite podcast app for BrainFood. And if you like this YouTube channel, you are sure to love that podcast. But if you want to watch something else right now, why not check out a related video from the TopTenz archives over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.